Welcome to the Fleet News Group podcast. With World EV Day 2025 just around the corner, we're talking to a true pioneer in electric last mile deliveries, Joe Sofra, CEO of ANC Delivers. For more than a century, ANC has been delivering products and they've grown and as an organisation. And now in 2025, they're a trusted delivery partner for some of Australia's biggest brands, including Bunnings, IKEA, JB Hi-Fi and Telstra. They don't just deliver products, they deliver exceptional customer experiences. And since making a bold commitment in 2019 with IKEA to achieve zero emissions deliveries by 2025, ANC has been on a determined journey towards fleet electrification. So today, Joe's going to share the story behind that journey, the challenges faced, and the significant milestone of reaching 100 electric delivery vehicles in their fleet this year. So Joe, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Pleasure to be here, actually. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's quite exciting. Like we were talking just before, World EV Day has been going for a while, and it sort of creeps up on us because I guess you're so busy working in it every day that it's just normal business. You probably don't need to celebrate it as much anymore, do you?
Well, we don't, Mark. And in actual fact, I think we have to trigger ourselves to remind ourselves how many vehicles we're nearing a milestone ourselves of sort of getting to that 100 vehicle. 100. We can now have 100 vehicles, over 100 vehicles on the road. So we kind of have to remind ourselves that sometimes you do need to step back and kind of reflect on milestones and celebrate things or take note of things. So
yeah. So you've got a 100-year history, a proud history. Can you maybe just give us a bit of background? Where did it start and how you've evolved to be the leader in electric last mile deliveries today?
Yeah. So look. So we do track our history back 100 years, Mark, which, I guess is, I suppose, a little bit unique in some regards, given that we're not a McDonald's or we're not a Coca-Cola or any of those. Look, we started off delivering theatre tickets on bicycles, way back in Sydney, 100 years ago, and I guess where the organisation has sort of continued to grow and evolve has always been around some form of activity that requires the delivery of a good, predominantly to a customer, and as things have evolved, I think what it sort of reflects in that 100 years for us as an organisation, the bit that we seize on is the organisation has a DNA of evolving itself and changing itself, and I think it's not hard for your listeners to appreciate, the difference between what would have been involved delivering theatre tickets on bicycles to delivering flat pack items for IKEA and electric vehicles. So I think it is a little bit of kind of our DNA and the way we sort of think about things quite a bit as an organisation, and that's why we make that connection with our history. So we do have that ability to innovate.
I would definitely do that. It sounds like a fantastic history and a story to tell. And every time I pay a fee to get my tickets when I book something for a movie or a thing, I kind of expecting someone to turn up on a bike and deliver them to me.
I was going to say that you've got to go and get it, right? Or you have to pick it up yourself. Well, now it's on your phone, right? Now they've even made it easier to self-serve. So
yeah. Oh, well, let's talk about 2019. That's 6 years ago now. It's almost a lifetime sort of with the pandemic and everything we had. But back then, electric vehicles were still fairly new and fresh. There was a few models on the market, but, in the truck space, it was very, very scarce. But IKEA came out and said that they were going to make a commitment of 100% zero emission home deliveries by 2025, and you guys were there at the start. You were the ones that, as a delivery partner, said, we'll partner with you on this. What was that like at the time to make that big commitment?
In all honesty, Mark, it was a little bit scary in the sense that, as you sort of say, that the technology's evolved quite dramatically, even in the last 5 or 6 years that we're talking about. And as you're right, there's this blank spot called COVID for most of us, where we lost time. And you're right. When we bought our first 3 trucks, they were what we would sort of classify as first generation vehicles, and we really converted diesel vehicles to electric. So that they weren't built to really accommodate an efficient electric vehicle operation. And when we contrast that now to the vehicles that are going in, into the fleet now, with modern brake regenerating technology that comes straight out of Formula One and things like that. You can imagine how different that would have been to the early generation vehicles that we put in. But it was a super critically important learning phase for us to start to address things that maybe some organisations are addressing now, things like range anxiety, familiarisation with the operation of those vehicles. What does it mean for our delivery professionals? All of those sort of things had to be considered. And I guess what you learn from a first generation is, what's wrong with that and why, unless those issues get resolved, why it will actually prevent you from scaling. I think the other part that started to emerge very strongly for us was also, running free is one thing because you don't have to think too long and hard about the charging infrastructure. But once you start to look at where the scale factors start to come in, then obviously, you've got to evolve that. But, I think, we would definitely give credit to IKEA for taking that bold move to say, hey, this is where we'd like to go. And, we want you to go with us, right? So absolutely.
Yeah, they're certainly leading the way. But so 2019, and then we mentioned the pandemic, but then we fast forward to 2022, and I think that was another milestone where you actually sort of started to launch it and talk about it a bit more.
Yeah.
And then sort of 3 years later, you're up to 100 vehicles. So can you maybe share those steps from 2022 to now? Those challenges you've learned and that scalability. Yeah.
I think, Mark. I think if I start with the 2019 kind of conversations with IKEA for us as an organisation, I think what that started to force us to do is to start to think about real alternatives to conventional diesel-powered vehicles or carbon empowered vehicles, if you want to think about it that way. As an organisation, I guess what it really triggered for us is to start thinking about where does sustainability really sit within our strategic imperatives. And I think predominantly around sort of three key areas. One is, as an organisation, there's no getting around the fact that we operate a fleet of vehicles. Therefore, we are a significant carbon emitter. What do we need to now start to do from an internal reflection perspective in terms of what works for ourselves, our employees, our shareholders, all of those things. So our own organizational responsibility. The second is that, we're not the only organization with that responsibility, and we're part of a big, broad chain. So we know that there are a lot of our client partners that also are giving consideration to that, and we're part of that network. So how do we enable and support that, which is obviously where an IKEA is going. But I think the third one, which I think has become the prime driver for us, is about what does the consumer and the customer and the community actually really want? And I think this aligns very strongly where our customer centricity sits within our organisation, because when we think customer, we're actually thinking, it's actually the consumer, it's the receiver of the goods. So we started to pick up on the drumbeat that actually consumers now are starting to give consideration to their purchasing decisions. And it makes a difference if that delivery is ultimately executed in a green vehicle that pulls into my driveway, noting that ANC is not an organisation that simply drops and runs. We are an organisation that typically delivers something that's difficult, more complex, bulkier. We spend probably in your driveway, in your home.
Yeah.
So it's we're not a courier business that drops a parcel at your door type thing.
Yeah.
So when we sort of move forward, when we go from sort of that 2019 to 2022, what we've sort of connected the dots is where does this now evolve and integrate firmly into our strategy? And then it just became about the how. How do we now start to really scale and lead? So that was the shift for us, and obviously from 22 to where we are today, that's what it's been about.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say about coming into, I suppose, into people's homes and I know like my family, and I'm in the industry, I drive trucks, that's part of what we do at Fleet News Group, but every time a diesel truck pulls up outside our house or delivers, there's almost like a shudder, and it's really weird. But when the electric vehicle, we have had deliveries through electric vehicle, and it's a different experience, or that reaction from the family. So I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to us that we actually put brands on them as well, so that the people see them as electric vehicles. Like there's no question that it is, because I think it's also part of that awareness and the connection with the customer. Right? Oh, I feel better about this outcome because it is a green vehicle. I think what it also does operationally for us, of course, is it allows us to start thinking about alternative windows of operation, as you sort of described. A diesel is noisy, you know, it's disruptive for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
An electric vehicle is the exact opposite to all of those things. And there's and people there is a fascination, there's a curiosity as well.
Yeah, there's definitely
curious about it, right? It's quiet. And I think the other part too for us is our delivery professionals. So, you know, it's and I do remember, Mark, I think it might have been one of the events we ran, and the minister at the time was talking to one of our delivery professionals, and I think the example that he gave to the minister was, well, you imagine, Minister, if you're working in your office and you've got a rattly air conditioner, it's going all day long. How effective are you going to be in your job?
Yeah.
I now am in an electric vehicle. It's silent, it's quiet. It makes a difference to how I feel at the end of the day. And then my ability to get up, because these guys do a hard job, right? It's a very hard job. They get up the next day and they go. They're not just driving a truck. They're driving a truck, getting out, taking it, unloading it, getting back in, going to the next. So it makes a difference on their, in terms of their, work environment and stress that they put up with every day. So it ticks a lot of boxes for us.
Yeah, and I can certainly vouch for that, because I do stop them in the street and talk to them when I see them around my local area. I take a couple of pictures because, it's Fleet EV News. We're really keen to hear about the experience, and they're always positive. They're always, that driving experience and everything. And so I've experienced that firsthand.
And I think they're just easier to drive as well.
Yeah.
I think they're just a simpler vehicle to get in and just drive.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into some nuts and bolts now, because getting to 100 electric vehicles is not without challenges, and your model is a contractor type model. So it's not it's not just employees being told that this is what we're doing, you got to do it. You've got to engage and everything. And you've mentioned charging infrastructure a couple of times. So maybe you can just share some of the challenges you've had and how you've overcome them, because there'll be people listening that are still kind of, I'm not quite sure whether I can do it, or I'm not quite sure if it'll work for me. So maybe you can, help them out a little bit.
Yeah, look, it's I think the first thing I will say is how rapidly the actual EV vehicle technology has evolved. So and that's definitely helped the cause over the last 3 or 4 years. I'd say probably 3, really, and particularly addressing things like range. But I think where it always starts with, you need to be very, very clear about what your requirements are, Mark. And this is probably where the industry is challenged a little bit. I think people kind of have this notion that you just look at a brown vehicle and you just want to replace it with a green one. Well, we haven't quite taken that approach. So we've sort of looked at it and kind of go, well, green vehicles actually could change what we do and what we're capable of. So what are the requirements? So, as an organization like ourselves, is, we carry things of different weights and different dimensions and different volume requirements. So how do we work with very specific OEMs around making sure that, the configuration of the vehicle types that we're using and deploying, create flexibility for us in terms of our last mile outcome. And so that's what we spend a lot of time doing. So understanding that and working with our OEMs. Obviously, you do need to do the work around understanding the vehicle classes. So you talked a little bit about, you mentioned that, ours is a contractor model, but we've stepped in to make sure that we are very, very, so we do a lot of the work with the OEMs. We're very clear about the carrying capacity and the specifics and the requirements. Then we work with our delivery professionals and our principal contractors to look at the vehicle classes and how these vehicle classes are deployed. So you're right. We've actually got to convince somebody else to spend the money, right?
Yeah.
So there are obviously some things that we do commercially to support that, but the most important thing is it becomes a real partnership now between us and our fleet, which is what we want anyway. So in actual fact, it's become something for us that's deepened our relationships with our fleet, and these are folks that have been with us for a long time, who like to work within our environment, and we obviously give prioritization to where it should when they've made such significant investments in our business. But we're technically very involved in understanding those requirements, and have been. And I guess that's where the benefit of being involved over the last sort of 5 or 6 years helps, is that you've built a cache of IP that you're able to build on, so that when we are sitting and negotiating with OEMs, we understand where their technology is at and what they're capable of, how we test their technologies, and come to our own determination as to the suitability of our business. I think
I just got to jump in here, because
Yeah,
fleet management, we talk fit for purpose all the time, and that's just the way you've described it. You understand what the job is, what the tool which is a vehicle needs to be used for, and that engagement you mentioned with your contractors and your delivery partners. That's like every fleet needs to do that, whether it's a driver or employee or a delivery driver, because they are different, and it sounds like, as you said, it's become a deeper engagement, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and it has, and even how you deploy them into fleet, and how you help build their range, and how you understand, from a routing and a range perspective, because you do have to appreciate that these vehicles, it's not just simply, you plug them in, charge their batteries up, and away they go. They do, they can regenerate, they can recharge as they go. And how do you utilize that? And how does that factor into your routing and how you decide certain things? So it's a different beast, and it's a positive different beast. It's not just hey, these are the things that we have to do to accommodate. No, in actual fact, my argument, and I've said this publicly a number of times, Mark, I don't see any constraints of deploying electric vehicle for metro last mile. I just don't see it.
Yeah, okay.
And I think the technology is well suited to do it. The challenge is, which is probably the one that a lot of your listeners might be scratching their head around, it comes down to the charging. And we know that the infrastructure is lagging the vehicle technology. I also do wonder about whether or not we've got all of our regulatory and policy settings right to actively encourage that, but that's well outside my mental capacity or intellectual level, so I'll leave that alone. I think how we've looked at a lot of the charging is to think about it from it's definitely a multi-dimensional strategy. There is no one size fits all. It has to be multi. So we have to take into consideration that sometimes the best way to charge up a vehicle is for the delivery professional to be able to take the vehicle home and park it somewhere nearby that has charging access. So park and go type arrangement, which we're leaning into quite a bit at the moment, to create where there is concentrations of drivers, where it just makes sense to do it that way. There is some charging, on site, and again, if I call out IKEA on this, that's where they've made their investment. To their absolute credit, they've made their investments in those areas, which allows us to now charge our fleet on site with them. And then there'll be some delivery professionals who just charge at home, because the cab chassis version of our one of the EV variants that we use is effectively a van with a big box on the back, so they can do that. So and then of course there's the public infrastructure as well. How do we utilize that as well? So you've just got to take all of that in tow, but that has been one of the really big learnings for us over the last sort of 3 years as we've gotten to bigger numbers.
Yeah, I've been driving around Sydney industrial areas out I think Minto, Campbelltown, out that way recently for various chasing stories, and I've noticed the new warehouses that are being built are actually having charging infrastructure installed, and so it's for employees by the looks of it, who are employees of the company who's going to enter the warehouse. But I'm guessing that's flowing through to new developments and warehouses as well, which is fantastic to see.
It is, and I think that the real, like when you think about light commercial vehicle, light commercial vehicle does a lot of work. It's not like a passenger vehicle. Like we all kind of know, passenger vehicles just don't do the same amount of work. So there's a lot of merit in electrifying light commercial, because even though there's less of them on the road than there are passenger vehicles, when you think about the amount of work they do, they actually do emit a high degree of carbon dioxide. So So when you then go and look at the public infrastructure is actually not really designed for anything much bigger than a car, just physically to fit, like just to get in. And that's one of our challenges is just doing that. You're right. We're starting to put it in places, like we're starting to see it more and more in warehouses. The only challenge we've sometimes got with that, though, of course, is sometimes the best place to have the charging infrastructure is where the vehicle parks itself at night.
Yes.
And what we want to try to avoid too is somebody having to drive it somewhere and then, drive home and then drive back and drive. So they're making trips that don't benefit. So it does need to be multidimensional in that regard. And that's been if I had to be honest, that's the single biggest challenge, aside from the cost of, I think the vehicle costs are still in some regards too high, and that's just a function of time and comfort with the technology and volume. But the charging infrastructure clearly remains the bottleneck.
Yeah. All right. Well, just moving on a bit away from the challenges. So we've talked about IKEA a lot as being one of your customers. We also mentioned JB Hi-Fi and Telstra. So I'm curious if you can maybe share with us, where's the drive coming from? Is it you mentioned customer experience and everything before, but is it them coming to you and saying that we want to do this? If you want to be our delivery partner, you need to have sort of green vehicles, or are you now, through the work you're doing, going to them and saying, hey, we can help you reduce emissions because we can provide green vehicles? Which way is it working?
Look, it's a mixture of all of the above, I think, is probably the best way to describe it, Mark. Clearly IKEA has a very, very clear strategy and a very clear mandate, and that's critically important. So it's very, very clear with IKEA, which is fantastic. If I think about some of our other retail partners that we've implemented green vehicles with, Who Gives a Crap, Temple and Webster as good examples, with Bunzl and a few others. If I think about, say, somebody like a Who Gives a Crap, there's a strong association with the brand for me. There's a connection between Who Gives a Crap what they're all about, and we love their journey, we love their brand, we love their story. There is a natural connection to more sustainable presentation of their brand and their deliveries in that form. So that was a really collaborative way to sort of come to that part. We were obviously keen to promote and push as many EVs across our fleet as we could, and they had that strong connection. I think similarly with Temple and Webster, there's that connection now that customers have a higher expectation around more sustainable outcomes. So how do we join the dots to make that work? I think the pleasing thing about it for me is it's not so much just driven by scope 3 emissions reductions. I have a compliance requirement. It's actually about, I think, more and more what we're hearing from our clients is it's actually important to customers, and so as a consequence of that, we're responding to that requirement. So I kind of put customers and then I go community as a connection point. I kind of go, the community's kind of demanding a change, which is a good thing.
That's fantastic. Yeah. All right. Well, just to finish off, what's next? You've reached this fantastic milestone. What are we going to be talking about in World EV Day in a few years? What's the next step? Have you got another target you're aiming for? Or are there different things that you're working on as far as sustainability and innovation? Yeah.
Look. I mean, sustainability is now threaded in there pretty hard, Mark, as you would imagine. Look out. We're, as far as we're concerned, we're only kind of scratching the surface in terms of the numbers that we want the fleet to be. Ideally, as I sort of said in my prior statement, for metro kind of last mile delivery in Australia, I don't see why every delivery can't be done through an electric vehicle, right? Now, I know there are things to overcome, like the charging infrastructure challenge that we talked about. So our aim certainly is, by 2028 to get a third of our fleet, so 300 plus vehicles, green. That's
okay. Wow.
So we're at 100 now. So we've got a steeper climb to come. And how we do that now, where those challenges are going to emerge, I do think we're probably going to run into the natural bottlenecks, but we want to just keep leaning into that pretty hard. I think the whole approach that we've taken into a lot of this is we've just leaned into the problems and found solutions. And if you don't do that, you just won't get, I can't remember what that old saying. I think it was Walt Disney. How do you get stuff done? You stop talking and start doing. Was the kind of the shift. Well, I think there's a bit about that. I think from the other part too is what we also recognise is efficiency and routing is critically important. So actually doing more with less vehicles is the other critical component of all of this for us.
Okay.
So there's no doubt, that in last mile, leveraging more latent capacity, networking things better, driving more productivity is going to be crucial. So, and we talk about it in our organisation as a carbon cost per order. So, what are you paying for in carbon units?
Yeah.
Drive that.
Yeah. And well, you've hit on another fleet management fundamental there, utilization. Like all fleets need to do that. And this is one of the great things I'm finding about with the transition across all different sectors, is they're starting to look at their vehicles and going, oh, do we need this many? Yeah. And I've got lots of examples where they're cutting 20% of the fleet, which that's emissions straight away. It's out of the fleet, and then they start using the assets better.
Yeah, and it's not even just the emissions. There's carbon unit costs going into building and manufacturing the vehicle in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So 100%. I think I would agree with that fully, Mark.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful chat. I've been following the journey since 2019. I was at that first press conference, so it's been great to see it being delivered, because I must admit I was a bit skeptical back then in 2019. I thought it's a great idea, but I don't know how we're going to get there, and so it's been fantastic to watch.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me, and thank you for watching the journey. So,
yeah. All right, so that's all for today's episode. A big thank you to Joe from ANC Delivers for sharing the story behind their electric vehicle delivery journey and what it means for their customers, their partners, and the planet. We can't forget. You can listen to more conversations like this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Just search Fleet News Group. You can also find out more information on electric vehicles and how fleets are adopting them and the technology, from charging infrastructure to new vehicles, on fleetevnews.com. And don't forget to look out for our quarterly magazine, All Things Fleet. You'll find it in Qantas Club lounges and also EV and fleet events around the country. So with World EV Day approaching in 2025, September 9th, here's to more milestones. Here's to a cleaner, greener future for last mile deliveries and for fleets in general. So thanks for tuning in.